I'm Kyle Kramer, the Executive Director of the Passionist Earth Spirit Center, an interfaith spirituality center in Louisville, Kentucky, devoted to creating a flourishing world through contemplative spiritual practices, fostering healthy communities, and environmental care. With support from the Kalliopeia Foundation, we've partnered with Bernheim, Arboretum, and Research Forest to create this video about the importance and urgency of ensuring the stability of our global climate. Many of these interviews with a variety of climate advocates took place at the Spirit Nest at Bernheim, a special sacred place that beckons Bernheim visitors into a deeper connection with nature.
I actually have to go all the way back to my home. My dad was a wonderful outdoors person, and he loved nature. He taught us to love nature. We had a garden, he had orchards, we had grapevines, and from him, I picked up this sense of being connected to the world. We ate from the garden and the trees. That was sort of in me. My love for the universe and for the world came from that early connection of being connected and loving and having affection for that place that was my home.
Our first kind of understandings of nature and where we connect in that picture really define what that perspective is for us. I think in my own experience, just being out in the forest, in the woods, is really homey. These days, as an Americorps volunteer, I have been blessed to be learning so much more about ecology, about the natural world around me. And so having opportunities to go, especially into like mature forests that are relatively undisturbed, with trees of different ages growing up and animals running around, almost conveys a sense of serenity and peace in place. It also gives me hope as I am facing anxieties of life or anxieties of climate. Just being in a place like a forest that has so many stages of growth and really kind of absorbs the idea of geological time in seeing that nature heals itself and has the power to heal us too.
Really, my connection with outdoors started with my grandfather. I'm originally from Michigan, and so we spent a lot of time outside. There's plenty of beaches, plenty of fresh water, so that connection with the land and water was always there because my family made sure to introduce it to the children. You know, we get 4 seasons, 3.5, depending on who you talk to, but it's such a beautiful place, and if it's a beautiful scene, nature just draws you.
One day, many years ago, I was sitting by a stream that runs through the woods just below the house where I live in Hart County. The water was flowing down the hill and over the rocks and into the pools between the sandstones, and the salamanders were playing on the rocks, and the birds were singing, and the flowers were just beginning to bloom. And I was beginning to see something that there's no way I could possibly see. I was beginning to sense the spirit of the stream. It wasn't the water, it wasn't the birds themselves or the trees or the flowers. It was all of them together. They were not separate. It was something about their presence that was moving within me. And I felt the stream moving within me.
Gog's field in her backyard. There's lots of green weeds everywhere except for a clearing where there's just dump with moss all over it, and I planted some seeds in another bare spot, and I also built fairy houses there.
Now I saw these kids here at Bernheim with your forest pals, and the older girls ran off and left all the rest of us. And after a while I said, well, what are they doing? What are y'all doing over there? But y'all didn't come back for about an hour because you were over behind that big log down at Rock Run. And I think you were making fairy houses together, right? So they're pretty serious about those fairy house places. When my husband Frank and I first got married, we grew up in Louisville, but we came out to a place just about 3 miles that way, if that's west, and we cleared the woods and built a house in it. I remember being on the roof, putting the roof on, and the trees were all in colors and the sun was going down that day. And that's the house where I grew up with my girls. And they grew up in the woods. The sweet spot in our life was the time when the girls were little and we were in that beautiful place with the strong house and the trees all around us. This woods, this forest.
What really got me excited about the environment, I think, was that my home in Arlington backed up right on a small local park, which had a creek in it. I would spend my free time just poking around in that creek, you know, turning over rocks and seeing what would swim away, paying attention to things like litter and water quality, and what the creek did in a big surge of water during a rainstorm. That's really where I kind of got started in paying attention to the environment. But in grad school, I spent 10 years in a really magical place called Wisconsin. In terms of like the landscape where my heart feels most at home, I would say it is Wisconsin. From wonderful wetlands and lake shores to, you know, the north woods and prairies, and just wonderful people too, of course, but a wide variety of species. And I really fell in love with Wisconsin and love to get back there every winter because I'm actually a winter person who adores snow and playing in snow. That may seem irrelevant for a conversation about climate change, but the truth is one of the things that makes me saddest about climate change is the loss of winters and snow.
Here we are November 1st, even though we're in Kentucky, but the leaves are still green. Just listening to the birds and the trees and everything is just so exciting. But there's also an indication of some of the things that are going on with the climate and some of the effects and impacts that we are having on the climate as far as our factories and the different things and emissions and things that I think we consider to be important in life, but really when it comes to the grand scheme of things and how we need to take care of the planet, aren't really that important.
Rainfall changes every year, and temperatures change every day, and storms are natural. Even climate change is natural. But it's only natural if it happens over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. What we're experiencing right now is not natural. Life cannot adapt to it. Life cannot adapt to what we are doing. So in order to live, we have to do something else. And that has to do with electricity. I like electricity. I've used it all my life, and it's good stuff. I like refrigeration, heating and cooling, all the conveniences. I would give it all up. I wouldn't use electricity at all anymore if I felt I had to do that for the sake of that spirit that I felt by the stream. I would pull all the plugs out of the wall and throw the meter away and cut down the power pole if I thought that was something that would save the livable world. If I were to do all that, the hurricanes would keep spinning up out of the Gulf, and the California would still be on fire, and the ice caps would still be melting, and the sea rise is still rising. What I do as an individual is very small. It's not something that's effective on the global level because there's only one atmosphere, and we're all in that atmosphere. And what we do as individuals is not as important as what we do as a whole. Nobody is carbon neutral until everybody is carbon neutral.
When I started hearing lots of things about it, and when I started hearing that it changed the weather.
It's not her job to fix that problem. We are the ones who have to stabilize this thing. She will have whatever we have left to work with, and that's our job. Our job is to make the stabilizing happen. And you know, that's real personal for me because, how old are you?
6.
6. Elena is 6. One of the things we got from Greta and the IPCC report is information. And our information says we have a target to do something by 2030. And if we do things by 2030, we are going to have a wonderful world coming out because we will be stable. You would be 15 in 2030, right? Okay, so that's a pretty good yardstick of what that means. That's where we have to be halfway where we need to go. My girls grew up, we have a big front porch. It's a solid house built by Dad. We've got trees around us protecting us, everything like that. It's a wonderful place to sit. I can't imagine that if just one of the predictions I've heard is that if we don't do our work in 2050, Kentucky will be a place that will mostly likely have many days of 100-degree weather in the summer, 3 months of the summer. Now that is not the same porch that I grew up on or that the girls grew up on. And what I want her to be able to do in 2050 is to have this wonderful Kentucky weather that we have. And probably, I would hope, not 3 months of 100-degree weather days.
My first time kind of experiencing climate change and learning more about it, I had the opportunity to study and live abroad in Cape Town, South Africa during college, during the height of Cape Town's water crisis. And I think truly learning more and understanding about how so many environmental factors play into something like water, a resource that is so important to all areas of life, really opened my eyes to those connections. And being passionate about so many justice-oriented things like immigration, like racism, and doing work with those things, I think also compels me to care more about climate, because climate change is such an intensifier of all of these issues. I mean, it's the most marginalized communities among us that are going to bear the brunt of the climate effects.
I can remember the very first Earth Day. That was kind of the beginning of my thinking that we need to pay attention here. And then over the years, I've just had some wonderful opportunities to do my self-education. I've gone to workshops and things like that that just continue to open my eyes. Then I began to pay attention to the kinds of things like the United Nations, the State of the World every year, and those sorts of things that really, they're kind of terrifying actually, when you're watching all of our ecosystems begin to fray. And how do we, me personally and the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, how can we contribute to bringing awareness to that, and then what can we do about those things with the resources that we have, both here in the United States, and we have sisters in India, Nepal, Belize, Botswana, all of us trying to work together. And so I think that awareness just continues to grow as things get worse, and they are getting worse.
What really shifted it for my mind was all around driving. You know, I was this sort of budding environmentalist who was worried about environmental problems like salts getting into our local waterways when we salt the roads in the winter. And that made me start thinking about our transportation system and who it harms. You know, starting with the small creatures in a wetland, but then thinking about how it harms people as well. And at the critical age of 15, I was lucky enough to be part of a cross-country bicycle journey from my front door there in D.C. to Seattle, Washington. I got to the other side of the country and then came home, and all my friends were starting driver's ed and thinking about spending the rest of their lives in these metal boxes, separated from the environment, endangering other people, and polluting. And spending lots of money on it, which for a 15-year-old who doesn't have any money, like that seemed crazy. So, you know, here I've gone all the way across country on a bicycle. Surely I can go to school on a bike. And so I just started doing it and said, you know, I'm going to not get a driver's license. And here I am, 47, still not driving, still biking everywhere I need to go because it makes me happy, healthy, fit, gets me out in nature no matter what the weather. I know what the weather is every single day, you know? And saves me so much money and hassle. I never have to hunt for parking. I never have to worry about insurance. It's really transformative to try and go car-free, and I encourage everyone to just do an experiment 1 week a year. We say, freeze your keys. Put your car keys in a block of ice in the freezer so that if you really need to drive, you can get to it, but it's going to be a pain in the butt, right? And commit to that week to try and explore your city by means other than driving alone. You could get in a car if you needed to, right? You could carpool with somebody if you had to. And you will learn so much about the place you live, about yourself and your physical capabilities. You might be surprised at actually what you can do. You might learn things about how imperfect our transportation system is for people who don't drive, and how much we've centered especially urban life, but rural life too, around this thing called the private automobile that we expect everybody to have to own, maintain, and drive at much endangerment to themselves and to the planet. So that experience of going car-free and committing to not getting a driver's license at the age of 15 really made climate change a very visceral, real issue for me. It also empowered me to feel like this is a global problem that I can't solve, but here's something I can do every single day that helps me feel like I'm contributing. I'm not polluting, I'm not endangering others when I'm getting to school today. And that's where it starts.
I don't know if it's despair necessarily, but it certainly is anxiety. When the panel comes out every year and they talk about the things that aren't working, when you hear about everything that is coming to us in the news, can we fix this? It's all so interconnected and it's so big. I think that's the part that's, for me, is the scariest part, is because we live in systems, and we live in a system of systems that each one of those, they all impact each other. Where do you begin to try to make a difference? You do feel like you're so tiny to try to do it, and that kind of sometimes can feel very overwhelming. I think the thing that moves me toward hope is the sense of trying to work with other people. You know, I belong to a number of organizations that are working on a variety of aspects of trying to help heal the climate and to make a change and to do things differently. And that gives me a sense of hope. It gives me a sense of doing something. To me, the image of all of these groups out there in the world who are trying to do something to make the change, like the white cells in our body that are out there going after what it is that shouldn't be there, trying to heal that up. That's an image that gives me hope and helps me to go on and keep putting my little piece in there.
I think practically, I find hope amidst the anxiety, I think you worded that really well, of climate catastrophe through education and through experiencing myself and watching people reconnect with nature. In my role as an Americorps volunteer, I think that being able to work with the sisters to educate them on different exciting opportunities and things that are happening in the world of making a difference in terms of climate change, as well as working with the littlest among us, so our school-age children or preschool-age children, and just getting them out there to catch bugs and see what they can find. Building those connections with nature and with practical solutions is really empowering, because that's how things translate, you know? If I'm educating my peers, little 4-year-olds, or the sisters, that's how people are going to one day use their dollars purchasing power. That's how they're going to vote. I mean, that translates on such a larger scale than just the 20 minutes I have to explain to you what this insect is and why it's important to preserve our biodiversity, right? A lot of young people have been kind of getting more involved in justice movements over time and certainly around climate. The youngest members of our society are also going to bear the brunt of having to deal with this. It's frustrating, like, why is nothing changing? We know the science, we know what's happening. Put me in Congress. But I think, again, I take a lot of solace in nature, and so seeing how our natural world heals itself, and arguably will continue to do so even if we are gone, I think is really powerful and reminds me that I'm still part of something much bigger.
I'm convinced that everybody everywhere has experienced the spirit of life in some form, whether it's sitting in the woods or on a mountaintop or sitting in church or sitting in the living room or walking down the street. We've all felt that stream moving within us, and it still moves within all of us and in every living thing. And all we really have to do is to contact that spirit, and it will move other people the way we have been moved.
Thinking about the history of Kentucky and Louisville, there's a lot of disconnect between African Americans, minorities, and nature because of access. A lot of it comes down to access. A lot of it comes down to inclusion. Some of the hikes that I lead, we talk about Iroquois Park and Chickasaw Park and all these different parks where Black people were not allowed to take part in the outdoors, and the places that were allotted to them or afforded to them didn't have a third, a fourth, an eighth of the amenities that some of the other parks did. And people really just want access, but that's a history that's there, that's here in Kentucky, and that people are still kind of grappling with, because unfortunately, there are still places where you can go and you're trying to celebrate and enjoy nature, and you can still be met with hostility or uncomfort because certain people aren't comfortable with or familiar with seeing Black people outdoors. And it's not that Black people don't necessarily enjoy the outdoors. Black people sometimes engage and interact with outdoors in a different way, like barbecuing, or sometimes they're outside and you see children in the streets playing double dutch or hopscotch or different things like that. It may not be in the same way that someone else appreciates nature, but there's still a connection that's there. Really, it's almost like a cultural exchange. It's important for other people to see people that look like us outdoors and to understand that, we are all given the same God-given air, the trees, everything to enjoy, but also for us to get comfortable and acclimated, because there are a lot of things that happened in nature that were really to the detriment of Black people. And so it's a constant relationship, it's a constant teaching and learning and exposure that just continues to this day. Every time I take a group out, or even just going out on my own, I think that things are changing. I think that technology and the way that we access and use technology is changing, and that helps expose people to the things that are available, and also to a little cultural enlightenment, so that when we go outdoors, and when I go outdoors specifically, people smile and wave. One of the ladies that went out on a hike with me, she was just reflecting on how open everyone that we were encountering was. She was taken aback. And usually that's the kind of experience that I want people to have when they're going out in nature, because nature is for everybody. Nature never closes. You know what I mean? It's something that is put here for us to enjoy and for us to also take care of. So those are the things that give me hope. And I really want it to continue. And I think by continue to draw people outdoors and letting other people see that everybody enjoys the outdoors, it's something that can kind of happen organically.
Tragically, for the last 30 years, most of us have done very little to address this global climate crisis, and now we're really up against the wall on it, and we're having to take more radical action than we could have. A nice gradual just transition would have been great, but we don't have the time for that. Obviously, the news coming out from further and further scientific research into the impacts of global climate change and the urgency of the crisis, it's hard to just ignore that, and it's hard not to be depressed by that. But I would say the thing that most gets me down about climate change is when I just ask people about what they're worried about. And we can't constantly be staring down in the face of horror all the time, but it needs to be a focus, a part of our daily lives in a way that makes it attractive and not so scary or so puts us as like deer in the headlights about it. Like, oh, this problem is so large and overwhelming that I can't do anything, right? That's the worst way to go about addressing this crisis. We need to make it very real for everyday people and help everyday people realize that even though you alone can't solve this, you can either be part of the solution or part of the problem. And you can do it every single day. Maybe, okay, giving up cars is too much. What if I just voted with my fork today to choose not to eat any animal products today? Because maybe I care about animals, or maybe I care about climate. And I know that our modern industrial agriculture system is really broken, and that the amount of resources going into raising a pound of animal protein is so vastly larger than the resources going in to raise a pound of plant-based protein. So maybe I'll try just not eating animals today, or maybe I'll try to conserve energy today. Maybe I'll try to be electricity free for a day. Ooh. I mean, that seems like, how could you even possibly do it? To radically rethink your life, right? Like, what would it look like without fossil fuels? It's at the root of everything we do. We touch it every single day in everything we do. So we couldn't imagine, without fossil fuels, are you kidding? I couldn't possibly. And yet we absolutely have to. There is no sustainability, there is no future without getting off of fossil fuels. And so take some radical action today to do it. It will be very life-affirming, I guarantee it.
I try to live and use things sparingly. You have this sense that there is abundance of everything. I feel like I've been blessed to travel. I've gone several times to be with our sisters in India and Botswana and Belize, and there you see that abundance is not there. There's a struggle just for the ordinary things of life, for water, for food, for electricity. And so I've brought that back in my heart, and I really try to live that way here too, because though we kind of kid ourselves that there's an abundance here, it's getting to be less and less. And if we really pay attention to the signs of the times, as it were, we have to know that. So I'm sparing about using water, I'm sparing about using electricity, I'm careful about food and trying to grow our own. We have a community garden at Nazareth and trying to grow what we can. So I think to live that way, I feel like I'm contributing to a future that can be different. We should be way beyond building these huge homes, for example. We've got to begin to think more tiny homes, actually. You know, I know that's not the lifestyle for everybody, but I think we do have to begin to think more tiny. How do we live a little more sparingly on the earth so that everybody can have some of it? Then what am I doing on a more macro level, like politically, and being connected with groups that are trying to see how we change our laws and how we do things like that that will take into account the needs of those who are on the margins, as well as nature and the environment. I really feel committed to that.
My background in my university studies is political science, and so I'm learning so much about ecology and biodiversity and all of these topics. And my recent gig in Americorps with the sisters has really opened my eyes to some really wonderful things that they're doing, calculating their greenhouse gas emissions, reducing air travel, eating meatless meals. I'm a historically optimistic person, so I love to kind of find new solutions. I'm like, the littlest thing that I'm doing can make the biggest difference in climate change. And so I've adopted many little projects of like hang drying my clothes to not use like dryer energy. I'm switching out my cat litter from like clay litter to like wood pellets to see if I can compost them. The most important thing to me right now that I'm trying to do to kind of bring myself hope and try to empower others is choosing my diet a little more selectively, specifically eating a locally grown plant-based diet. Though I'm living on a meager Americorps salary, I really try to go to farmers markets. I try to buy organic produce because I know beyond the health impacts of what I believe in using pesticides and how we commercially grow food. Reimagining our agricultural system and improving the quality of our soils is one of the biggest keys in learning how we can reverse some of the effects of climate change. Really supporting like local growers who have committed to growing organically and using water more wisely and things like that has been really important to me, and I think carries effects into how I'm feeling in my body and how I'm feeling in conversations I'm having in the work that I'm doing.
If you find yourself outdoors and you come upon someone who may not necessarily look like you or behave in a way that you understand, the same way that you're enjoying nature and the outdoors, more likely than not, that's the same way that they're enjoying it too, even though it might look differently. So just be open. It's not necessarily a reason to be alarmed. Some of the ways that I break the ice with people is, well, tell me about, the flowers that you see, or if there's something that just takes my breath away, whoever's on the trail, it doesn't matter who it is, I will comment on it, and then a conversation is started. So just be curious, be open, and understand that people are trying to enjoy and develop a love of the nature and the outdoors in the same way that you are.
I definitely avoid using as much carbon as possible. In fact, I wrote a book called The Carbon Boycott. And in this, my idea here is that we can't just blame the government. We can't just blame the utility companies or the oil companies, because they're doing what we want them to do. When we create an aggregate demand for fossil fuels, they're just going out and getting it for us. So if we want them to go away, what are we going to do? How are we going to get to work? How are we going to heat our houses? So it's much more internal than we think it is. And it's a matter of us looking within and trying to figure better, more practical ways to live in the future. And that will begin by boycotting carbon fuel.
I'm connected very strongly to Citizens Climate Lobby. And Citizens Climate Lobby is a group of ordinary people working to create the political will for change towards the good in climate. I would like people to know that there is a tool, a policy tool, called carbon fee and dividend. And what this does is start to put an honest price on carbon coming out of the ground, which is those fossil fuels that the carbon escapes into the air, that warms the atmosphere, changes the weather, raise it up gradually so it doesn't hurt anybody, but gradually make our economy honest so that we gradually realize we don't need fossil fuels. And then let's take that pot of money, and that gets divided equally to all Americans, to be a stabilizer. It's a stabilizer, and it helps anybody who's upset with any of the tumult of change, help put that money in their pockets.
And I gotta say, don't just do this alone. Sustainability comes through community. Our resilience comes through working together in community. So yeah, I mean, there's personal behaviors that you do alone. You're not gonna necessarily have to bring in your full community to figure out what you're gonna eat today. In a sense, you do though, right? But do it together with other people. And the most important thing about your actions is that you influence others in doing them. You make others take a second and question, well, what could I do that too? Why do you do that? If we don't start having those conversations, we're never going to create change.
What we're facing here is a situation where we all have to stop using all fossil fuel. I'm not talking about cutting back on emissions. I'm not talking about reducing. I'm talking about eliminating completely. And you know, that sounds like an extreme position, and it is an extreme position, but it's what we have to do to keep the living world livable. It's important to me not only to change the way I live, but to work with other people, with friends and family and other organizations, to try to bring everybody around to a single global consciousness that this is important for our continuing life on this planet, not just for ourselves, but for life as a whole.
I think if you were to talk about how you can love the world, there are a lot of answers to how to love the world. What do you do to love the world?
Tarantula, I like to climb in it. I liked to climb in it until the slug family moved into the footstand.
Is that the name of the tree?
Tarantula.
Tarantula.
I also have Bonnie, the one that shields the trampoline, and its leaves just fell, so whenever Daddy comes to jump, we make him make it into a pile so we can jump into it.
So her yard trees have names, and she climbs in.
And the one
Both
in
of
front is Sylvia.
Sylvia.
I don't climb in Bonnie or Sylvia, just Tarantula.